The fragile peace of the Middle East was shattered today, February 28, 2026, as the United States and Israel launched a massive, coordinated assault on Iran. This large-scale military action, described by both nations as a preemptive offensive, began in the early hours of the morning, sending shockwaves across the globe. The US military has named its part of the mission Operation Epic Fury, while Israel has dubbed its involvement Operation Lion's Roar. These strikes represent a dramatic escalation of tensions that have been simmering for years, pushing the entire region to the brink of a much wider and more devastating war. The attacks are expected to continue for several days, with pauses only to assess the damage inflicted on Iranian targets. The stated goals from Washington and Tel Aviv are both ambitious and direct. US President Donald Trump announced that the primary objective was to destroy their missiles and raze their missile industry to the ground. Both he and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu went even further, openly calling for regime change in Tehran. In a direct appeal to the Iranian people, they urged citizens to take over your government and cast off the yoke of tyranny. This rhetoric signals a clear intent not just to degrade Iran's military capabilities, but to fundamentally alter the political landscape of the country. A move that many international observers fear will only lead to more bloodshed and instability. This aggressive military campaign did not come from nowhere. It follows a previous, though smaller, attack in June 2025, which was known as Operation Midnight Hammer or the 12-Day War. That earlier conflict targeted Iran's nuclear facilities, setting the stage for this much larger confrontation. The timing of this new offensive is also significant, coinciding with the Jewish holiday of Purim, adding a layer of historical and cultural context to the military actions. The decision to launch such a broad attack indicates that diplomatic avenues have completely broken down, and that the involved nations have now committed to a path of direct and forceful confrontation. The international community has been thrown into a state of high alert. The scale of the operation is immense, involving air and missile strikes across a vast territory. Both the US and Israel have committed significant military assets to the campaign, suggesting a long-term strategy rather than a short, punitive strike. The explicit call for the Iranian military and police to lay down their arms, with President Trump offering immunity to those who comply, is a clear attempt to fracture the Iranian state from within. As the world watches, the immediate questions are how Iran will endure this assault and how its inevitable response will reshape the security of the entire Middle East. The assault on Iran has been widespread and devastating, targeting a multitude of cities and strategic locations across the country. The capital, Tehran, was among the first and hardest hit, with explosions reported in its central districts. Other major urban centers, including Isfahan, Qom, Karaj, and Tabriz, also came under heavy fire. The strikes were not random. They were aimed with precision at the heart of Iran's military and political infrastructure. The primary targets included facilities linked to Iran's ballistic missile and nuclear programs, military command centers, and naval bases on Chesham Island and in the port of Kanarak, which are vital for Iran's maritime power in the Gulf. The attacks were also deeply personal, aiming to decapitate the country's leadership. Reports confirmed that the office and compound of Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei was struck, along with the presidential office. Even a residence belonging to former President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad was hit. Israeli sources claimed that current President Masoud Pezeshkian and the Armed Forces Chief of Staff, Abdolrahim Mousavi, were also targeted in the strikes. While Iranian state media has insisted that its top officials are safe and accounted for, the clear attempt to eliminate the country's leadership demonstrates a high-stakes strategy aimed at creating chaos and a power vacuum within the Iranian government. For ordinary Iranian citizens, the attacks have turned daily life into a nightmare of fear and uncertainty. The most tragic report so far comes from Minab, in Hormozgan province, where an Israeli strike hit a girls' primary school. Early reports indicate that between 40 and 51 people, most of them children, were killed, with dozens more injured. This horrific incident highlights the terrible human cost of the conflict. In cities across the country, a sense of panic has taken hold. Long lines have formed at fuel stations and bakeries as people scramble to secure essential supplies, fearing a prolonged siege. Many residents in Tehran are attempting to flee the city, causing massive traffic jams on the roads leading out of the capital. To compound the chaos and prevent organized resistance, the Iranian government and the effects of the strikes have plunged the country into a digital darkness. Internet connectivity has plummeted to just 4% of its normal levels, creating a near-total information blackout. In parts of Tehran, cell phone signals have also been cut, severing communication lines for millions of people. Schools and universities nationwide have been ordered to close, and the Basij militia, a volunteer paramilitary force, has been deployed onto the streets of Tehran. This deployment shows the government is deeply concerned not only about the external attack, but also about the potential for internal unrest and protests from a terrified and isolated population. Iran's response to the US-Israeli offensive was not delayed. It was almost immediate and ferocious. In a powerful show of force, Iran launched what it described as a crushing counterattack, firing dozens of ballistic missiles and explosive drones. This retaliation was not confined to a single front. Iran aimed its weapons at two primary adversaries, Israel itself and the numerous US military bases stationed across the Middle East. This swift and widespread counteroffensive instantly transformed the conflict from a targeted strike on Iran into a regional war, pulling several other Gulf nations directly into the line of fire and triggering a cascade of defensive actions across a volatile area. The night sky over the Arabian Peninsula lit up as air defense systems were activated in multiple countries. Explosions and the streaks of interceptor missiles were seen and heard in major cities like Abu Dhabi, Dubai, Doha, and Manama. In the United Arab Emirates, air defenses managed to intercept several incoming missiles, but the danger was far from neutralized. Falling debris from one of the interceptions rained down on a residential area in Abu Dhabi, tragically killing one civilian of Asian nationality. This incident served as a grim reminder that even successful defense measures carry immense risks for civilian populations caught in the crossfire of a high-tech war. The US military presence in the region became a primary focus of Iran's wrath. American bases in at least 5 countries were targeted. In Bahrain, the home of the US Navy's Fifth Fleet, a missile impact was confirmed by verified video footage showing a direct hit on the facility. Other key US installations, including Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, Al Dhafra in the UAE, and Al Salem in Kuwait, also faced missile and drone attacks, forcing American troops to take shelter and rely on their sophisticated defense networks. Jordan, a key US ally, reported that it successfully shot down 2 ballistic missiles that were heading toward its territory, demonstrating its commitment to defending its airspace from any spillover. In a clear warning to its neighbors, Iran's foreign minister issued a stark threat, declaring that any Gulf state allowing the US or Israel to use its territory or airspace for attacks would be considered a hostile party and a legitimate target. This declaration has placed immense pressure on nations like the UAE, Qatar, and Bahrain, who host American forces but are now facing direct retaliation from Iran. The airspace over the region has become a battleground, with Iran, Qatar, and the UAE all closing their airspace to civilian traffic. The rapid escalation has trapped these countries between their powerful allies and their powerful neighbor, with their own national security hanging in the balance. The outbreak of open warfare between the US, Israel, and Iran has drawn sharp and divided reactions from world powers, reflecting the deep geopolitical fault lines the conflict has exposed. Russia was among the first to react, vehemently condemning the US-Israel strikes as an act of unprovoked aggression and a reckless violation of international law. Moscow immediately called for an emergency meeting of the United Nations Security Council to address the crisis, positioning itself as a key opponent of the Western-led military action. This stance aligns with Russia's long-standing support for the Iranian government and its strategic interests in limiting US influence in the Middle East. In stark contrast, nations in the Gulf aligned with the US have voiced their support for defensive measures while condemning Iran's retaliation. Saudi Arabia labeled Iran's missile strikes on its neighbors as brutal aggression, a sentiment echoed by Kuwait and the UAE, who asserted their sovereign right to self-defense. Meanwhile, Western allies of the US and Israel have adopted a more cautious tone. The European Union, the United Kingdom, Australia, and Italy have all issued calls for restraint from all sides, emphasizing the urgent need to protect civilian lives and de-escalate the conflict. This diplomatic tightrope walk highlights the dilemma faced by nations who are allied with the attackers but fear the catastrophic consequences of a full-blown regional war. The conflict has caused immediate and severe disruptions to global travel and commerce. With Iran, Israel, Qatar, and the UAE all closing their civilian airspace, a critical corridor for international flights has been shut down. Major airlines, including British Airways, Lufthansa, Emirates, and Turkish Airlines, have been forced to cancel or reroute hundreds of flights. This has created chaos for travelers worldwide, stranding passengers and severing key transportation links between Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. The disruption serves as a potent symbol of how a regional conflict can have immediate, tangible effects on the globalized world, impacting people far from the actual fighting. Ultimately, as diplomats condemn and generals strategize, the heaviest price is paid by ordinary people. The sudden eruption of violence has shattered hopes for peace, with Oman, a key regional mediator, expressing deep dismay that a peace deal had been within reach just hours before the first missiles were launched. Now, the world watches in fear as a new and unpredictable crisis unfolds. The immediate concerns are for the civilians in the line of fire, the potential for a humanitarian catastrophe, and the terrifying possibility that this conflict could spiral into a global confrontation with unimaginable consequences for international peace.